What's up, squad? It's your boy, Articode, whatever you want to call me. So this is going to be kind of basic, some expectations. This is an informative presentation on SSH tunneling capabilities. So let's go over some basic stuff. SSH stands for Secure Shell. It provides end-to-end encryption. It's used for transferring files and executing commands remotely. There are two ways to log in: username and password, username and private key. Easy peasy, you know. This stuff is all good. It's all well and good, but you know, we can do more. We can do more with than just these these basics. All right, guys. All right. So it's basic command structure. SSH. Then you have your options. Then your username at the host name or IP address. There are some useful options. You can use TAC-I to specify your identity file if you have like a private key. TAC-P is the port number. The SSH config file, you can do a lot with this, but primarily what I mostly use it for is just setting up basic host names, so I don't have to remember SSH. Here's TAC-I to my identity file, TAC-P for this port number. This is the host name IP address, or the IP address and all that. This is the username. You can just put all of that into like one thing. So you can basically type SSH server 2, if that's what you want to call it. Or in this example, they have hostname 1. You can SSH hostname 1, and it'll preload all of those things for you. Wonderful. But now, there's more. Okay, there's so much more, guys. Let's get to the nitty gritty. Okay, let's get to why you came here. That's right. You can tunnel network traffic through an SSH connection, accessing content that would otherwise be inaccessible. Now there's three types of tunnels. There's a local forwarding tunnel, a remote forwarding tunnel, and a dynamic forwarding tunnel. Local forwarding tunnels. A port on the client tunnels traffic to the target through an SSH connection to the server. It's local forwarding because you create a port on your local host in a way that when a server receives communication, it forwards to the target. The client connects to the target's port 80 via localhost port 8080 in this example, which is the SSH tunnel through the server's port 22, right? We type this command, and obviously you could specify IP addresses and stuff, and it will create this port. This port 8080, it'll create that on your local host. And when you talk to it, okay, it goes through this 22 connection that you have, this SSH 22 connection. It goes through this, and then the server receives it and says, oh, I know what to do with this, and then forwards it to the target. Easy peasy. An example, right? So let's say you're behind a firewall for whatever reason. Sure, why not? Right? Here's your client's IP address. This is you. This is your IP address. Okay, as you can see, we're on the 169 network, right? And so we're going to do SSH capital L port 8080. That's our local port. All right, so that's going to be the listening port that's going to be open on our machine, right? And then your target's information, right? So not the server that you're forwarding through, but the actual your goal, your end objective, which in this case we're saying is a web server. This is port 80 at this IP address, right? So the syntax is very important. The local port that you're opening, your target host or IP, your target port. This is what's gonna get. This is where you're getting forwarded to. Then you're actually SSHing. You're logging in via SSH to the middleman, right? The username at the IP address. So that is a requirement in order for this to work. You have to be able to log into this server. Primarily, you could use this to access resources that you otherwise might not be able to access. So say there's a website you want to go to that you can't get to, but you can get to an SSH server out in a content delivery network. Well, if you can forward your web traffic through that SSH tunnel and access websites, it's like a proxy. You know, think of it like that. It's a little different, but think of it in that way. Now we're going to get into remote forwarding. A port on the server establishes an SSH connection to the client, right? So it's you're logging in via SSH to the client from the server. Okay, so that's why it's talking to port 22 on the server. You need a listening SSH server, right? And it creates a port on the client. So you're starting here, you're tunneling here to create this port. Then this port can be used on this client to go back through that tunnel and talk to the target. Okay, this specific tunnel, it's very useful for an attacker, right? So say you got access to an internal server somehow, get an SSH command. You're able to get an SSH command to run on this server. Well, from the server, that's why it's in yellow here, yellow, server, there we go. From the server, you run this command, SSH TAC capital R for a remote forward. This means that it's going to be expecting something to come back. Okay? The port on the client that you want to open, right? Target host and target port that it's going to be forwarded to, and then of course you're actually SSHing into the attacker, the client. So the client is now going to be able to use this port 8080 to go back through this tunnel, through a firewall. Say this network is behind this firewall that only allows outbound SSH to a content delivery network and not inbound SSH. This is how you would use that in order to get into the network and access, delicious things. Okay. Now we have dynamic forwarding. A port on the client forwards traffic to any target through an SSH connection to the server. It requires SOCKS proxy functionality, and it's useful for forwarding tools typically unavailable in whenever. So like if you did a local forward, you'd have to go to one specific target, and then you can nmap that one specific target. But say you want to nmap multiple targets, well, you need to set this up and then use something like proxy chains or set up a proxy functionality within your nmap command itself, and then you can get to multiple targets and do like a host discovery scan or something like that. So this is useful for whenever you don't know what your targets are. Like you can get to this server, right? But you don't really know what you're touching. You want to do some network discovery, or you want to target multiple things with one connection. So an example of this, right, from our client, we're going to do SSH TAC capital D space the port that we're using as our proxy port space. So there's none of that colon shenanigans here. And then the server. So basically, we're just not specifying a target and using a capital D. The big D. That's it. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. So let's look at some examples. So here on a Kali machine, doing a local forward, we can see my target is 56.102 on port 80, and I'm creating a local port 8080 on my machine, and I'm SSHing into 169.4. So then we look at our net stat, and we can actually see port 8080 is a listening port. It's bound. So now we can actually go onto our server, our middleman, and we can see that SSH connection has the keep alive. It's important to note that nowhere do you see the tunnel, right? This is the tunnel. It's just it's going through a normal SSH connection. It's important to understand that, because you don't see suspicious tunnel activity. You just see SSH activity. So if SSH activity is normal, then this won't raise any alarms. Allegedly. So we go on our client and we go to localhost 8080, and look, we're going through that listening port on our local machine. That's why we do localhost port 8080. It goes through that tunnel and talks to our target, which is 192.168.56.102.80. Look at that. We opened up a web page. Beautiful. Now on our target, we're going to do a TCP dump. And this is showing us basically a simple view of the network traffic. And we can see that a request is coming from .103, which is the middleman, to .102. It does not show, okay, that it's coming from the Kali machine. It shows just from the middleman, right? So we can look at a packet capture. Again, this is what it looks like from the client. Encrypted, normal SSH traffic. Okay, we're just going through that SSH tunnel, right? And then this is what it looks like on the target. It's unencrypted. However, that's not a huge red flag. It makes sense because we're talking to HTTP. It should be unencrypted. When we look inside, okay, we can see some potential red flags. First things first, the user agent. Okay, this is important to keep in mind if, as an attacker, based on your your target's environment, you might want to change this. If they're in a Windows environment and they primarily use Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge or Google Chrome, okay, this is going to set off some big alarms. Firefox on Linux, yeah, you might want to change that. All right, and there's absolutely ways to change this. Another thing is, in the URI request, it shows localhost :8080. That's a pretty good indicator that you're using tunneling or some kind of forwarding. You know, that's not a normal thing that a normal user would be using. You know, normal users don't do this. Normal users go to google.com, facebook.com. So it's important to keep that in mind and maybe use a host file to create an appropriate URL to not give off any red flags. You want to be careful. You want to be cognizant of those things that you do. Other than that, it doesn't actually reveal the source IP address. That's super important to remember. So now remote forwarding. Okay, this is from the server. This time we would execute this command, and we're saying that same port. Okay, we're gonna it's gonna function exactly the same, and except the way the tunnel is created is different. This is a tunnel that's created from the server going out to the client, right? There are middleman going to the client. And when I say server here, I'm talking about the middleman machine. So the encryption and requests are going to be the exact same. Traffic looks exactly the same in TCP, dump, and Wireshark. The only difference is like the source and destination of SSH traffic between the client and the server. Obviously, it's going to be originating from the server going out to the client. You're still using that same port 22 tunnel, functionally the same. It's just how it gets created is the different part. Dynamic forwarding now. Let's take a hot look at this. So setting up the command from our attacking machine. Okay, we're gonna remember we do capital D, then the port number, then our username and target. No, sorry, not username and target. This is the server that we're forwarding through. I need to be careful what I'm saying. Okay. You need to make sure on your browser, if you're connecting to a web service, that you set up the proxy correctly. So we're saying that our browser is going to go through localhost port 8080. Okay, that's super. You will not be able to if you don't set this up. You're not going to go through your tunnel. It's just not going to happen. Okay. Now this time on the Kali machine, I'm browsing to the target's IP address, which normally I could not access. I don't have a network interface to the 56 network, so I can't technically access it. However, because we set up our proxy settings, the request is going through localhost port 8080, which gets forwarded to the server, and the server says, "Hey, I know who that is. I got you, fam. I'm gonna send it their way." And then boom, look at that. Now, check this out. Full request URI, look what it says here. It doesn't say localhost, it says the IP address, right? So say you had a URL and you knew it, well, this could function that way, and you don't have to do any host file changes, right? Whereas the other way, you would absolutely have to do host file changes because you need to navigate to your localhost port 8080. Whereas this way, the browser handles that. Again, though, user agent, still a big deal. Make sure you keep an eye out for that. All right, let's take a look at some other stuff. We have PuTTY. I just want to briefly show how you would set up a tunnel with PuTTY. I don't normally use this for tunnels. I normally just use it for quick little windows. I'm connecting to something things. But it's important to know your tools. So of course, first you want to configure your host name and your port. Then you can actually go to, if you look right here, okay, we scroll down, okay, and we go all the way down to connection, SSH, tunnels, right here. You're going to click on tunnels. And you fill this in. So the destination would be your target, right? So if I'm doing a local forward, I would set it up just like this. Then my target and the target port. Okay, the source port, the local port that's going to be opened on my local machine, right? So it's going to go through 8080. All right, so you open up that tunnel and you log in, because remember we're logging into this machine, right? And then we can go to our browser and connect to localhost 8080 because we created that listening port. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. All right, and there you have it. You learned a little bit about tunneling.